The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Martha Henderson's weathered hands as she struggled to repair the broken fence post that marked the eastern boundary of her property. Sweat dripped from beneath her wide-brimmed hat, staining the collar of her faded cotton dress. 6 months had passed since James died of the fever, and every day brought new challenges that tested her resolve to keep the ranch running. "Damn stubborn thing," she muttered under her breath, wrestling with the wooden post that refused to stay upright in the hard-packed earth. The hammer felt heavy in her calloused hands, and her shoulders ached from the morning's work. At 28, Martha had never imagined she'd be running a cattle ranch alone, but James had believed in her strength even when she doubted it herself. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up, shading her eyes against the glaring sun. 3 riders approached from the direction of town, their silhouettes wavering in the heat like mirages. As they drew closer, Martha recognized the lead rider, Samuel Morrison, the town's self-appointed spokesman and one of the most vocal critics of her continued presence on the ranch. "Mrs. Henderson," Morrison called out, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy as he reined in his horse. His companions, 2 younger men Martha didn't recognize, flanked him with the easy confidence of those who believed their presence intimidated. "Working hard as usual, I see." "Mr. Morrison," Martha replied evenly, not bothering to set down her hammer. "What brings you out to my land today?" Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well now, that's just the thing. Several of us in town have been discussing your situation. Winter's coming again, and folks are concerned about a woman trying to manage all this property alone. It's not natural, and frankly, it's not safe." Martha felt her jaw tighten. This wasn't the first time Morrison and his supporters had made their feelings known about her ownership of the ranch. "I appreciate your concern, but as I've told you before, I'm managing just fine." "Are you?" Morrison gestured toward the broken fence, the unpainted barn, and the small herd of cattle visible in the distance. "From where I sit, it looks like this place is falling apart. James was a good man, God rest his soul, but he's gone now. You need to face reality." One of Morrison's companions, a lanky young man with pale eyes, leaned forward in his saddle. "My pa's made you a fair offer for this land, ma'am. More than fair, considering the condition it's in." Martha's grip tightened on the hammer handle. "And I've told your father the same thing I'm telling you now. This ranch is not for sale. James and I built this life together, and I intend to honor his memory by keeping it going." Morrison's facade of politeness began to crack. "Martha, be reasonable. You can't run cattle, maintain buildings, and protect yourself from Comanche raids all at the same time. Just last week, they hit the Martinez place 20 miles south. Killed 2 men and made off with half their horses." The mention of Comanche raids sent a familiar chill down Martha's spine, but she forced herself to stand straighter. "I'm aware of the risks, Mr. Morrison. I'm also aware that plenty of men in this territory have lost everything to those same risks. Being male doesn't guarantee success out here." "Maybe not," Morrison conceded, "but it sure improves the odds. Look, we're not trying to cheat you. The offer on the table would give you enough money to start fresh somewhere safer, maybe back east, where a woman like you belongs." Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "A woman like me? You mean a woman who knows how to work for what she wants? A woman who isn't afraid to get her hands dirty?" The tension in the air was palpable as Morrison's horse shifted restlessly beneath him. "I mean a woman who's letting pride cloud her judgment. This isn't charity, Martha. It's good sense." Before Martha could respond, a distant sound made all 4 of them turn toward the horizon. A thin column of black smoke was rising from the direction of the Morrison ranch, several miles to the north. Morrison's face went pale as he squinted at the ominous sign. "That's coming from your place, Mr. Morrison," Martha said quietly. Without another word, Morrison wheeled his horse around and spurred it into a gallop, his companions close behind. Martha watched them disappear in a cloud of dust, her heart pounding with a mixture of vindication and fear. If the Comanche were raiding that close to town, it meant the situation was more serious than anyone had wanted to admit. She turned back to her fence post, but found her hands were shaking too badly to grip the hammer effectively. The isolation she had grown accustomed to suddenly felt oppressive, and James's absence struck her like a physical blow. He would have known what to do, would have had a plan for protecting the ranch and the livestock. Martha set down her tools and walked toward the house, her mind racing through her options. She had James's rifle, enough ammunition to last through a siege, and water from the well. The cattle would have to fend for themselves if trouble came. There was no way she could drive them to safety alone. As she reached the porch, Martha paused to look out over the land she and James had worked so hard to build. The golden grass stretched endlessly toward the horizon, broken only by the occasional mesquite tree and the winding creek that provided water for the cattle. It was beautiful and harsh and unforgiving, much like the life she had chosen to live here. "I won't let them drive me away," she whispered to the wind, as if James might hear her wherever he was. "This is our home, and I'll defend it with everything I have." Chapter 2. The storm approaches. The acrid smell of smoke still lingered in the air the next morning as Martha made her way to the well behind the house. She had spent a sleepless night listening for sounds that might herald approaching danger, the rifle propped against the wall beside her bed. Every creak of the house settling, every distant call of a coyote, had sent her heart racing. Now in the pale light of dawn, the world seemed deceptively peaceful. The cattle grazed quietly in the pasture, and the only sounds were the gentle lowing of the animals and the rhythmic squeak of the windmill turning lazily in the morning breeze. Martha drew water from the well and splashed her face, trying to wash away the exhaustion that clung to her like dust. She had decisions to make, and they couldn't wait much longer. Morrison's visit had crystallized something she'd been trying to ignore. Her position here was becoming more precarious by the day. The sound of a horse approaching at speed made her freeze, water dripping from her cupped hands. A single rider was coming from the direction of town, pushing his mount hard across the open ground. As he drew closer, Martha recognized Dr. William Hayes, the circuit doctor who served the scattered ranches and settlements in the area. "Mrs. Henderson, doctor," Hayes called out as he reined in his lathered horse. "Thank God you're all right. I was afraid." "What's happened, doctor?" Martha asked, though she suspected she already knew. Dr. Hayes dismounted and removed his hat, revealing graying hair that stood in disarray. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, and there were dark stains on his shirt that Martha recognized with a sinking heart. "The Morrison place was hit yesterday afternoon, just after Samuel and his boys left to visit you. The Comanche came in fast, must have been watching and waiting for the right moment. They killed 2 ranch hands and made off with most of the horses. Samuel's wife and daughter—" Dr. Hayes paused, swallowing hard. "They were taken." Martha felt the blood drain from her face. "Alive? As far as we can tell. But Martha, that's not the worst of it. This wasn't just a raid. It was coordinated. The Martinez Ranch was hit the same day, and so was the Thompson homestead. The Comanche are moving in a pattern, and they're being led by someone who knows the area well." Martha sank down onto the edge of the well, her legs suddenly unsteady. "How many people are dead?" 7 that we know of. Maybe more. The territorial militia has been called in, but they won't arrive for at least 3 days. Until then, we're on our own." Dr. Hayes stepped closer, his expression grave. "Martha, I know you're determined to stay here, but you need to reconsider. Pack what you can carry and come into town. We're setting up a defensible position at the church. What about my cattle, my land? They're not worth your life," Dr. Hayes said bluntly. "I've seen what the Comanche do to isolated settlers, Martha. James wouldn't want you to die defending property." Martha stood slowly, her mind working through the implications. If she abandoned the ranch now, Morrison's predictions would come true. The place would fall apart without constant maintenance, and she'd have nothing to show for the years she and James had invested here. But if she stayed, and the Comanche came, she might not live to regret the decision. "How long do I have?" she asked finally. "No way to tell. Could be hours, could be days. But the pattern suggests they're working their way systematically through the outlying properties. Yours is one of the most isolated." A distant sound made both of them look toward the southern horizon. A dust cloud was visible, too large to be made by a single rider or even a small group of cattle. As they watched, the cloud grew larger and more defined, clearly moving in their direction. "That's them," Dr. Hayes said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Martha, we have to go now." But Martha was already moving, not toward the horse Dr. Hayes had offered, but back toward the house. "I need to get James's rifle and some supplies. If I'm going to leave, I'm not going empty-handed." "There's no time," Dr. Hayes called after her. "They'll be here in minutes." Martha burst through the front door and grabbed the rifle from beside her bed, along with a small bag she kept packed with essentials. Her hands moved with surprising steadiness as she collected ammunition, dried food, and the small amount of money she kept hidden behind a loose board in the kitchen wall. When she emerged from the house, Dr. Hayes was already mounted and holding the reins of his spare horse. The dust cloud on the horizon had resolved into individual figures now, at least 20 riders moving at a steady pace toward the ranch. "Martha, please," Dr. Hayes urged. She swung up onto the horse, the rifle across her lap, and took one last look at the home she and James had built together. The house looked small and vulnerable against the vast expanse of prairie, and she found herself memorizing every detail. The crooked shutter James had never gotten around to fixing, the vegetable garden where she'd spent so many peaceful mornings, the corral where their horses had once grazed. "I'll be back," she said quietly, as much to herself as to James's memory. They spurred their horses toward town, but they had waited too long. The Comanche riders, spread out in a loose line, were moving to cut off their escape route. Dr. Hayes cursed under his breath and veered toward a small grove of trees that offered the only available cover. "This way," he shouted. "We can circle around." But as they reached the trees, more riders appeared from the north, effectively surrounding them. Martha found herself face to face with a group of Comanche warriors unlike any she had imagined. They were not the savage monsters of frontier tales, but proud, disciplined men with intelligent eyes and purposeful bearing. At their head rode a man who commanded attention without saying a word. He was tall and powerfully built, with graying hair braided with feathers and beads. His face was weathered but dignified, marked by the kind of quiet authority that came from years of leadership. When his dark eyes met Martha's, she felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, not of his face but of something deeper. Here was another person who had lost much and learned to carry the weight of responsibility alone. The leader raised his hand, and the other warriors halted. For a long moment the only sounds were the heavy breathing of horses and the whisper of wind through the grass. Then the chief spoke, his English accented but clear. "The woman will come with us. The old man may go." "Dr. T." Hayes started to protest, but Martha cut him off. "Doctor, go back to town. Tell them what happened here." "I won't leave you," Dr. Hayes said firmly. The chief's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested growing impatience. "The old man goes now or he stays forever." Martha looked at Dr. Hayes, then at the circle of warriors surrounding them. There was no point in both of them dying, and someone needed to carry word back to town about what had happened here. "Go," she said softly. "Please." Dr. Hayes hesitated for another moment, then slowly turned his horse toward town. The warriors parted to let him pass, but Martha noticed that several of them rode after him, clearly intending to escort him away from the area rather than simply letting him go. The chief moved his horse closer to Martha's, studying her with those dark, intelligent eyes. "You are the woman who tends the cattle alone." It wasn't a question, but Martha nodded anyway. "Yes. Your husband is dead." Again, not really a question, but again she nodded. The chief was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing some internal decision. Finally he spoke again, his words carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You will stay with us, under my protection." As the group began to move, Martha found herself riding beside the man who had just declared himself her protector. She didn't know his name or his intentions, but something in his bearing told her that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Behind her, smoke began to rise from the direction of her ranch. Chapter 3. Into the Unknown. The Comanche camp materialized from the landscape like something born from the earth itself. As they crested a low hill in the late afternoon, Martha saw dozens of buffalo-hide teepees arranged in precise circles beside a meandering creek. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sounds of daily life, children playing, women talking, dogs barking, drifted up to meet them. It was so unexpectedly normal. Martha had ridden in silence for most of the day, her wrists bound loosely with leather cord that chafed against her skin. The chief, she still didn't know his name, had set a steady pace across the rolling prairie, never pushing the horses too hard, but never stopping long enough for her to catch more than a few minutes' rest. Her back ached from the unfamiliar saddle, and her throat was parched despite the water they'd given her at midday. Now, as they descended toward the camp, Martha felt a mixture of fear and curiosity warring in her chest. These people had killed 7 settlers in coordinated raids, had burned her home and stolen her livestock, yet the scene before her looked remarkably peaceful, almost domestic. "My people call this place Singing Water," the chief said suddenly, speaking for the first time in hours. His voice was quiet, meant only for her ears. The creek makes music over the stones. Martha listened and realized she could hear it, a gentle babbling sound that did indeed resemble a distant song. Despite herself, she found it beautiful. As they rode into the camp, people emerged from their teepees to watch. Martha expected hostility, or at least curiosity, but most of the faces she saw were simply watchful. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, and old men nodded respectfully to the chief as he passed. The chief led her to a large teepee at the center of the camp, its buffalo hide painted with symbols Martha didn't recognize. He dismounted gracefully and came to help her down from her horse. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he steadied her on unsteady legs. "I will stay here," he said, gesturing toward a smaller teepee nearby. "My sister will bring you food and fresh clothing." Martha found her voice at last. "What's going to happen to me?" The chief studied her for a long moment. "That depends on many things. For now you are safe." "Safe from what?" "Your own people." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his dark eyes. "My people do not harm those under my protection, but there are others who might not understand my decision." Before Martha could ask what he meant, a woman emerged from the smaller teepee. She was perhaps 40 years old, with graying hair braided with small shells and kind eyes that reminded Martha somehow of her own mother. She spoke to the chief in rapid Comanche, her tone questioning but not hostile. The chief replied in the same language, then turned back to Martha. "This is Bright Moon, my sister. She will care for you while you are here." Bright Moon approached Martha with careful steps, as one might approach a frightened animal. She spoke in halting English. "Come, you, tired, need food." Martha looked back at the chief, but he was already walking away toward the large teepee. She had no choice but to follow Bright Moon into the smaller dwelling. The interior of the teepee was warmer and more comfortable than Martha had expected. Buffalo robes covered the ground, and a small fire burned in the center, its smoke rising through an opening at the top. Bright Moon gestured for Martha to sit on one of the robes, then busied herself preparing food from clay pots arranged near the fire. "You are widow woman?" Bright Moon asked as she worked, her English carefully pronounced. "Yes," Martha replied softly. "My husband died last winter." Bright Moon nodded sympathetically. "My husband also dead. 2 winters past." "Sickness take him." The simple statement created an unexpected bond between them. Martha found herself studying the other woman's face, recognizing the particular kind of sadness that came with loss and the strength that came from surviving it. Bright Moon handed Martha a wooden bowl filled with what appeared to be stew, meat and vegetables in a rich, savory broth. Martha's stomach growled audibly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since dawn. "What did your brother mean when he said I was under his protection?" Martha asked between careful spoonfuls of the surprisingly delicious stew. Bright Moon's expression grew serious. "Running Bear is war chief, but also peace chief. His word is law among our people. But," she paused, searching for the right words in English, "some warriors think white women bring bad medicine, think she should be traded back to her people." "Traded for what?" "Horses, guns, food for winter." Bright Moon's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Our people are hungry. White soldiers kill buffalo, burn our hunting grounds. Children go to sleep with empty bellies." Martha set down her bowl, appetite suddenly gone. "Then why am I here? Why didn't he just let me go?" Bright Moon was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "Running Bear lost his wife 3 summers ago. White settlers attacked our winter camp, killed many women and children. He has been different since then, more serious, more alone." "You think he's lonely?" "I think," Bright Moon said carefully, "that he sees something in you that reminds him of what he has lost, and perhaps what he might find again." Outside the teepee, Martha could hear the sounds of evening settling over the camp, the soft conversations of families gathering for the evening meal, the laughter of children playing in the last light of day. It should have been terrifying to be surrounded by people she'd been taught to fear, but instead she found it oddly comforting. "What happens now?" Martha asked. Bright Moon stood and began gathering up the empty bowls. "Now you rest. Tomorrow Running Bear will hold council. The elders will decide your fate." As if summoned by his name, the chief's voice called out from outside the teepee. Bright Moon answered in Comanche, then turned to Martha. "He asks if you need anything before night comes." Martha considered the question. She needed her freedom, her home, her old life back. But those things were beyond anyone's power to give her now. "Tell him," she said finally, "that I need to know what he wants from me." Bright Moon translated, and Martha heard the chief's low chuckle from outside. His response, when it came through Bright Moon's translation, was unexpected. "He says you will understand when you are ready to see with more than your eyes." As darkness fell over the camp, Martha lay on the buffalo robes, staring up at the smoke hole in the teepee's peak. Through it, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that shone over her ranch, over the town, where Dr. Hayes was probably telling everyone she was dead. But she wasn't dead. She was here in this strange place, among people she didn't understand, protected by a man whose motives were as mysterious as the symbols painted on his teepee. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the loss of everything familiar, she found herself curious about what tomorrow would bring. Fatu Kuisi Sanda Chapter 4, The Council of Voices. Martha woke to the sound of voices raised in heated discussion. Dawn light filtered through the teepee walls, and she could hear people gathering outside. The council, she realized with a jolt of fear. Today they would decide what to do with her. Bright Moon entered the teepee carrying fresh clothing, a simple dress made of soft deerskin, decorated with small blue beads around the neckline and sleeves. It was beautiful in a way Martha hadn't expected. "You must dress properly for council," Bright Moon explained, setting the garment down beside Martha. "Show respect for our ways." Martha fingered the soft leather. "Will I be allowed to speak for myself?" "If Running Bear permits it, but be careful with your words. Some of the elders remember many wrongs done by your people." As Martha changed into the unfamiliar clothing, she tried to prepare herself for what was coming. In her world, she had learned to speak her mind plainly, to defend her position with logic and determination. But this was not her world, and she didn't understand the rules here. The council convened in a large clearing at the center of camp. Martha found herself seated on a blanket beside Running Bear, facing a semicircle of older men and women whose faces showed the accumulated wisdom and wariness of many years. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. Running Bear stood and began to speak in Comanche, his voice carrying easily across the gathering. Though Martha couldn't understand his words, she could hear the respect in his tone, the careful way he presented his arguments. This was a man accustomed to leadership, but who understood that leadership meant persuasion, not simply giving orders. An elderly man with a deeply lined face and silver hair raised his hand to speak. His voice was sharp with anger, and Martha caught several words she recognized: white eyes, soldiers, death. When he finished, several other elders nodded in agreement. Running Bear replied calmly, his tone never rising, but somehow carrying greater authority than the angry elder's words. As he spoke, his eyes briefly met Martha's, and she saw something there. Not affection exactly, but a kind of recognition, as if he saw in her something worth defending. A woman elder spoke next, her voice carrying the kind of practical authority that Martha associated with mothers and grandmothers. Her words seemed to focus on practical concerns. Martha caught references to winter, food, and the difficulties of caring for a captive who couldn't contribute to the tribe's survival. When Running Bear called her name, Martha realized with a start that she was being asked to stand. The eyes of the entire council fixed on her, and she felt the weight of their combined attention like a physical pressure. "They want to know," Running Bear said in English, "why you should live when so many of our people have died at the hands of your kind." Martha's throat felt dry, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "I never killed anyone. I never wanted war between our peoples." Running Bear translated, and she heard murmurs of dissatisfaction from some of the elders. The angry old man spoke again, his words clearly dismissive. "He says your intentions do not matter," Running Bear translated. "Your people take our land, kill our buffalo, break every promise they make. Why should one white woman be spared when white men show no mercy to our women and children?" Martha felt a flash of the anger that had sustained her through all the months of struggle after James's death. "Because I'm not responsible for what other people do. I've lost everything too. My husband, my home, my cattle. I know what it's like to have your life destroyed by things beyond your control." As Running Bear translated her words, Martha saw some of the hostility in the elders' faces shift to something else. Not sympathy exactly, but at least attention. The woman elder asked a question. She wants to know what skills you have, Running Bear said. Can you tend the sick, work leather, preserve meat for winter? Martha thought quickly. I can doctor both animals and people. I've set broken bones, delivered babies, treated fevers. I know which plants can heal and which can harm. I can work with horses, gentle them, train them, treat their injuries. This caused a stir among the elders. Horses were clearly valuable to these people, and medical skills were always needed. The woman elder spoke again, her tone more interested now. She asks if you would use these skills to help our people, even though we are your enemies. Martha looked around the circle of faces, some still hostile, others beginning to show cautious interest. You're not my enemies, she said finally. You're people trying to survive, just like I am. If someone is hurt or sick, it shouldn't matter what color their skin is. Running Bear's translation of her words created the longest discussion yet. Several elders spoke in turn, their voices rising and falling as they debated. Martha caught fragments, references to medicine, to horses, to the approaching winter, to previous white captives who had caused trouble for the tribe. Finally, the elderly woman who had spoken about practical concerns raised her hand for silence. She spoke directly to Running Bear, her words carrying the weight of final judgment. Running Bear listened, then turned to Martha. White Dove speaks with the wisdom of many winters. She says you may stay through the cold months. If you prove useful to the tribe, if you show respect for our ways and cause no trouble, then in the spring we will decide whether you remain or return to your people. Martha felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had won a reprieve, but at what cost? What will be expected of me? You will work alongside our women. You will tend the sick and injured. You will help prepare for winter. Running Bear's expression was unreadable. And you will learn our ways, so that you understand the people whose lives now depend on your choices. As the council dispersed, Martha remained seated on the blanket, trying to process what had just happened. 6 months. She had 6 months to prove herself useful enough to live, to show these people that she could contribute something valuable to their survival. Bright Moon approached and sat beside her. You spoke well, she said quietly, but now the real test begins. Words are easy. Living among us, and that will be much harder. Will you help me? Martha asked. Bright Moon smiled, and for the first time since her capture, Martha saw something that looked like genuine friendship in another person's eyes. I will teach you what I can. But remember, Running Bear has risked much by keeping you alive. If you fail, you will not be the only one to pay the price. As they walked back toward the teepees, Martha caught sight of Running Bear standing with a group of warriors, their conversation intense and serious. When he looked in her direction, she saw the weight of responsibility in his eyes, the burden of a leader who had made a decision that could endanger his people. She had 6 months to prove that his faith in her was justified, 6 months to learn to live in a world completely different from anything she had known, and 6 months to discover whether the strange connection she felt with this man who had saved her life was real, or simply the desperate hope of a woman who had already lost everything once and couldn't bear to lose it all again. Chapter 5. The Choice Between Two Worlds. 3 months later, late October 1874. The first snow of winter arrived early, dusting the camp with a fine layer of white that made everything look clean and new. Martha pulled her buffalo robe tighter around her shoulders as she knelt beside the injured horse, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The mare had stepped in a prairie dog hole during the morning hunt, and her front leg was badly swollen. Easy, girl, Martha murmured in English, then repeated the words in the Comanche she had been learning. Her hands moved with practiced confidence as she examined the injury, feeling for broken bones beneath the swelling. Around her, several warriors watched with the kind of respectful attention she had earned over the past months. The horse wasn't badly hurt, a severe sprain that would heal with rest and proper care. Martha mixed a poultice from willow bark and other plants that Bright Moon had taught her to identify, wrapping the mare's leg with strips of soft leather. As she worked, she felt the familiar satisfaction of using her skills to heal, regardless of whether the patient was human or animal. "She will be well?" asked Grey Wolf, the young warrior who owned the horse. His English had improved remarkably since Martha's arrival, as had her Comanche. They often practiced with each other, trading words and phrases like children trading marbles. "She'll be fine in a few days," Martha replied, patting the mare's neck. "Keep her quiet, and bring her to me tomorrow so I can check the wrapping." Grey Wolf nodded gratefully and led his horse away. Martha gathered her supplies and stood, brushing snow from her deerskin dress. The clothing that had felt so foreign 3 months ago now seemed natural, more suited to this life than the heavy cotton dresses of her former existence. "You have gentle hands," a familiar voice said behind her. Martha turned to find Running Bear approaching, his tall frame cutting an impressive silhouette against the white landscape. Over the months, their conversations had grown longer and more personal, though always with the careful courtesy of two people learning to trust each other. "My husband used to say the same thing," Martha replied, then felt a small shock of realization. It was the first time she had mentioned James without feeling that sharp stab of grief. The pain was still there, but it had softened into something more like a fond sadness. Running Bear fell into step beside her as they walked toward the center of camp. "Tell me about him." The request surprised her. In her old life, people had avoided mentioning James after his death, as if speaking of him might cause her to break down. But Running Bear asked the question as if he genuinely wanted to know. "He was kind," Martha said slowly, searching for the right words in both English and Comanche. "Patient. He believed that people were basically good, even when they gave him reasons to think otherwise. He would have liked you, I think." "Why?" "Because you're a good leader. Because you care more about your people's welfare than your own comfort." Martha paused, considering. "Because you see past the surface of things to what really matters underneath." They had reached Running Bear's teepee, and he gestured for her to sit beside the fire that burned outside. The evening meal was being prepared throughout the camp, and the smell of cooking meat made Martha's stomach growl audibly. She had grown to love the communal feeling of these evening hours, when the whole tribe gathered to share food and stories. "I have news," Running Bear said, his tone suddenly serious. "Riders came from the east today. The territorial militia is moving through the area, searching for our camp. They offer a reward for any white captives returned unharmed." Martha felt her blood turn cold. "How much time do we have?" "Perhaps a week, maybe less. We will have to move deeper into the hills, to places where the soldiers cannot follow with their wagons and cannons." Running Bear studied her face carefully. "But you could go to them. Tell them you were well treated, that you wish to return to your own people. They would take you back to town, back to your old life." The offer hung between them like a physical thing. Martha realized that this was the moment she had been unconsciously preparing for over the past 3 months, the choice between the life she had known and the life she was discovering. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. Running Bear was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, neutral. "I want what is best for you, and for my people." It wasn't really an answer, but Martha understood the complexity behind his words. As war chief, he had to consider the welfare of the entire tribe. A white woman among them was both an asset and a liability, useful for her skills, but dangerous if her presence brought unwanted attention from the military. "If I stayed," Martha said slowly, "what would that mean? For me, for the tribe, for us?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Us?" Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to continue. "These past months I've felt, I don't know how to say it in either language, like I belong here in a way I never belonged anywhere else, like the person I am in this place is more real than the person I was before." Running Bear's expression softened. "I have felt this too. But wanting something and being able to have it are different things. If you stay, you can never go back to your old world. And my people, some will always see you as an outsider, no matter how long you live among us. And if I go back to town, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Martha met his eyes directly. "I've already lost one love to death. I don't want to lose another to fear." The word love seemed to echo in the space between them. Running Bear reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm despite the cold air. "The soldiers will be here soon," he said quietly. "If you are going to leave, it must be now, before we move deeper into the wilderness. Once we go to the winter camps, there will be no turning back." Martha looked around the camp, at Bright Moon tending her fire, at Grey Wolf checking on his injured horse, at the children playing in the snow despite the approaching danger. These people had become her family in a way she hadn't expected. The thought of leaving them, of returning to the isolation and judgment of her old life, filled her with a deep sadness. "I have a different idea," she said finally. "What if I went to the soldiers but not to stay with them? What if I could convince them that this tribe poses no threat, that you're just trying to survive the winter, Maybe I could buy you time to reach the winter camp safely. Running Bear's grip on her hand tightened. Too dangerous. If they don't believe you, if they think you've been influenced by us, then I'll come back to you when it's safe, Martha said firmly. But I won't let your people suffer because of me. I won't be the reason children go hungry or warriors die in unnecessary battles. They sat in silence as the snow continued to fall around them. Martha could see the internal struggle playing out across Running Bear's features, the war between his duty as a leader and his feelings as a man. There is another way, he said finally. We could send word to the soldiers that we are willing to talk. You could serve as, what is the word? Translator, mediator, help both sides understand each other. The idea had merit, but Martha could see the risks. Would your warriors accept peace talks? Would the soldiers? Some would. Others. Running Bear shrugged. But perhaps it is worth trying. Perhaps it is time for people on both sides to choose understanding over fear. As if summoned by their conversation, Bright Moon approached with bowls of the evening meal. She looked between Martha and her brother, reading the tension in their faces with a sister's intuition. You have decided? She asked in English. Martha looked at Running Bear, then at Bright Moon, then out across the camp where people were going about their evening routines despite the approaching danger. These people had taken her in, taught her their ways, accepted her contributions. The thought of abandoning them now felt like betraying everything she had discovered about herself in this place. Yes, she said finally. I've decided. Tomorrow, I'll ride out to meet the soldiers, not to surrender and not to return to my old life, but to see if there's a way for all of us to survive this winter without more death on either side. Running Bear nodded slowly, respect and worry warring in his expression. And after? If the talks succeed? Martha smiled, feeling a certainty she hadn't experienced since James's death. After, I come home, to the people who've taught me that family isn't about blood or skin color. It's about who you choose to stand with when the storms come. As the snow continued to fall and the camp settled into evening quiet, Martha felt a deep peace settle over her. She had found her place in the world, and tomorrow she would fight to protect it. Not with guns or hatred, but with the same gentle strength that had helped her heal injured horses and win the respect of people who had once been strangers. The White Widow had made her choice. Now she would discover if two worlds could learn to meet in the middle, guided by understanding rather than fear. 3 days later, Martha rode between the Comanche camp and the approaching cavalry unit, carrying a white flag and a message of hope. Behind her, Running Bear watched from the ridge, his heart full of pride for the woman who had chosen love over fear, understanding over hatred. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it held the promise of something better than endless conflict. And in the distance, the first green shoots of spring grass were already beginning to push through the melting snow.